The date is November 16, 1951. Morning fog dissipates over Portsmouth Harbor as Captain Dennis Campbell ascends the gangway of HMS Illustrious. Inside his briefcase rests a single technical diagram, a flight deck design offset by 10 degrees from the ship's centerline axis. The sketch appears deceptively simple, almost childlike in its basic geometry. Yet within 18 months, this configuration will fundamentally alter carrier aviation safety protocols and save more naval aviator lives than any weapons system developed during the Second World War. What Captain Campbell understands with absolute clarity is the severity of the crisis facing naval aviation. During the preceding 12 months, the Royal Navy recorded 43 aircraft destroyed in landing accidents. 17 pilots died in these incidents. Dozens more sustained career-ending injuries. Every single loss occurred during the final 30 seconds of flight approach, that critical window when a 30-ton jet aircraft traveling at 140 miles per hour attempts to engage, arresting cables on a pitching deck surface while a steel crash barricade waits 60 feet ahead, positioned to destroy any aircraft that fails to catch the wires. The American situation proved even more catastrophic. In 1951 alone, United States Navy carrier aviation documented 776 Class A mishaps accidents, resulting in fatalities or complete aircraft loss. This averages more than 2 major incidents per day during peacetime operations. The Korean War amplified these losses significantly. USS Boxer reported 7 barrier collision accidents during a single deployment cycle. USS Princeton lost 9 aircraft within 4 weeks of combat operations. If you appreciate evidence-based military history told through primary sources and declassified documentation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We have viewers from 43 countries and growing. On straight deck carrier configurations, missing the arresting cable system resulted in one inevitable outcome: collision with the crash barricade at full engine power, or penetration into the forward parked aircraft strike package, creating fireballs that could kill a dozen deck personnel within seconds. The jet age had arrived in naval aviation, but carrier infrastructure and operational procedures remained fundamentally unchanged from propeller-driven aircraft requirements. The Grumman F-9F Panther jet fighter landed 40 knots faster than the propeller-driven Grumman F-6F Hellcat it replaced. The Panther's turbojet engines required 7 seconds to spool from idle power to full military thrust, an eternity when an aircraft descends toward ocean surface at 20 feet per second. Landing signal officers stood on the carrier's port quarter platform, using colored paddles to communicate approach corrections. By the time a pilot recognized he was approaching too low, too fast, or too high, physics had already determined his fate. Every flag officer, every aeronautical engineer, every test pilot in naval aviation understood the fundamental truth: carrier aviation had reached a breaking point. Jet aircraft represented the future of naval air power, but present operational realities were systematically killing trained aviators. What Captain Campbell does not know, what nobody in that Portsmouth conference room knows, is that his proposed solution will face immediate rejection and ridicule from the very technical experts whose responsibility includes solving impossible engineering problems. The breakthrough will not emerge from committee deliberations or wind tunnel testing, but from one officer's refusal to accept that competent pilots should die because of correctable design flaws. The crisis originated in 1945, the precise moment when Lieutenant Commander William P. Lawrence executed the first jet aircraft carrier landing aboard USS Wake Island. His Ryan FR-1 Fireball touched down at 90 knots, 20 knots faster than any piston engine fighter in the fleet inventory. The arresting gear cables screamed as they absorbed the kinetic energy differential. The landing succeeded. The warning inherent in that success went completely ignored by naval aviation planning staffs. By 1950, every major naval power confronted identical challenges. Turbojet engines revolutionized aircraft speed and operational altitude, but their slow throttle response characteristics created a lethal operational trap. Propeller-driven aircraft allowed pilots to reduce throttle to idle on the landing signal officer S-cut signal and essentially fall onto the deck surface. The aircraft's high-drag propeller disc and wing configuration provided sufficient deceleration. Jet aircraft could not execute this maneuver. They required power on landing approaches, maintaining thrust throughout touchdown, because their engines took excessive time to accelerate if a wave-off and go-around became necessary. This created an impossible scenario for pilots. They flew final approaches with engines spooled to high-power settings, committed to landing, unable to climb quickly if they missed the arresting cables. On straight-deck carrier configurations, 4 arresting cables stretched across 60 feet of deck surface. Behind these cables, the crash barricade, complex web of steel cables engineered to catch aircraft that missed all 4 wires. Behind the barricade, rows of parked aircraft, fuel trucks, ammunition carts, and all equipment necessary to maintain the flight deck as an active combat zone. The mathematics proved brutal in their simplicity. A Panther landing at 125 knots covered 211 feet per second. If a pilot missed all 4 arresting cables, he possessed exactly 2.1 seconds before striking the crash barricade. The barricade functioned correctly in some incidents. When it failed, 30 tons of jet fuel and ordnance plowed into forward-parked aircraft at 100 miles per hour. Captain Bruce Williams, Air Operations Officer aboard USS Kearsarge, witnessed 11 sailors die when a crash barricade failed in March 1951. The official accident. Investigation report stated, aircraft struck barrier at full power. Barriers separated from deck mounts. Aircraft continued forward trajectory into 6 parked F-4U Corsairs. Resulting aviation fuel fire reached aviation gasoline storage areas. 14 aircraft destroyed. 11 personnel killed, 23 injured. Carrier flight operations suspended 48 hours. The solution every Naval Aviation Command attempted. Stronger, more reliable crash barricades. The British developed the flexible deck concept, a rubberized landing surface, theoretically capable of catching jet aircraft without conventional landing gear. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown conducted 40 landing trials on the experimental system at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough. His official reports described the system as fundamentally sound from an engineering perspective. In private conversations with fellow pilots, he characterized it as bloody terrifying. The Americans constructed progressively stronger barricade systems. The Bureau of Aeronautics allocated $3,200,000 developing the Davis barrier system, a mechanical cable web capable of stopping a 25,000-pound aircraft at full throttle. When the system functioned as designed, results proved impressive. When it failed, the devastation was total and catastrophic. But stronger crash barricades did not prevent accidents. They merely contained the destruction to smaller deck areas. Every senior naval aviator understood the actual problem, the flight deck configuration itself. Captain William T. Razier, head of aviation military characteristics at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, wrote in June 1945, "Current landing procedures force all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with zero margin for error. This operational requirement is incompatible with jet aircraft performance characteristics." Translation: naval carriers were designed for propeller aircraft capable of landing at 70 knots and executing last-second approach aborts. Jet aircraft landed at 130 knots and could not abort approaches. The naval aviation community was attempting to land 1952-era aircraft on 1942-era ships. Personnel would continue dying until this fundamental incompatibility was resolved. Everyone in naval aviation agreed. Everyone understood the problem's nature. Nobody could devise a viable solution. The British attempted flexible deck systems. The Americans pursued improved barricades, backup barricade systems, and emergency net configurations. The French explored reducing aircraft landing weights through fuel management. Nothing produced acceptable results. The accident rate continued increasing. What naval aviation required was someone unconventional enough to question the one assumption nobody questioned. Why must the landing area remain parallel to the ship's longitudinal axis? What they needed was Dennis Campbell. Captain Dennis Royal Farson Campbell was not supposed to solve any significant engineering challenges. His career trajectory indicated a competent administrator, not an innovator. Born November 13, 1907, in Southsea, England, Campbell entered the Royal Navy in 1925 as a midshipman candidate. He qualified as a naval aviator in September 1931, early enough to fly fabric-covered biplane trainers, late enough to understand that naval aviation had evolved beyond gentleman's recreation into a profession demanding engineering precision and technical competence. During the Second World War, he flew Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, obsolete aircraft that nonetheless disabled the German battleship Bismarck in May 1941. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during Mediterranean convoy operations. Nobody described him as a genius. Nobody characterized him as a visionary thinker. Following the war's conclusion, the Admiralty assigned him to the Ministry of Supply as Deputy Chief Royal Navy, representative, essentially a desk position managing technical liaison between Royal Navy requirements and civilian defense contractors. He possessed zero formal engineering credentials, no advanced academic degrees in aeronautical sciences. His responsibilities consisted of paperwork, tracking development schedules, attending coordination meetings, signing procurement requisitions. But Dennis Campbell possessed one quality that formal credentials cannot teach. He could not ignore dead pilots or accept their deaths as inevitable costs of operations. In 1951, he attended the funeral of Lieutenant Michael Mick Lithgow, a test pilot killed when his jet struck the crash barricade aboard HMS Implacable. Lithgow had been Campbell's student during flight training, 23 years old at time of death. He executed a perfect approach at correct speed, but his aircraft floated 6 feet beyond the arresting cable zone. The crash barricade failed under impact loads. Lithgow's aircraft disintegrated. His widow was 5 months pregnant at the time of his death. Campbell stood at that graveside service and later told his deputy, Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, "This is insane. We're murdering them with our own safety equipment." A pilot executes everything correctly and still dies because 60 feet isn't sufficient margin for error. There has to be another approach. Goodhart expected nothing beyond this statement. Officers make similar comments at funeral services. But Campbell continued obsessing over the problem. He pulled accident investigation reports. He interviewed landing signal officers. He studied landing pattern data. He wasn't an engineer, so he did what non-engineers do when confronting technical problems. He drew pictures and sketches. The revelation occurred during a train journey from Portsmouth to London. Campbell sketched carrier deck configurations in his notebook, attempting to visualize methods for providing pilots more operational room. If you cannot make the landing area longer, make it wider. If you cannot make it wider because the ship has a fixed beam dimension, angle it. Angle it. He drew a flight deck canted 10 degrees to port of the ship's centerline. Now the landing zone did not terminate at the crash barricade. It terminated in open water. A pilot who missed the arresting cables could advance his throttle to maximum power, climb away, and attempt another approach. No crash barricade, no parked aircraft, no catastrophic collision potential, just air and ocean and a second opportunity. The concept seemed so elementarily simple, it felt stupid, which indicated either he had discovered something brilliant, or he had overlooked something obvious that every trained engineer already understood. On August 7, 1951, Captain Dennis Campbell convened a technical meeting at the Ministry of Supply. Attendees included Louis Boddington, Director of Naval Air Department, Farnborough; Rear Admiral M. Slattery, Chief of Naval Research; and 6 senior aviation engineers from civilian contractors. Campbell opened his briefcase and displayed his sketch. The conference room erupted immediately. "That is completely illegal," Commander James, Senior Flight Operations Specialist, stated flatly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words carried the weight of established regulatory authority. The International Air Navigation Convention requires all flight operations to align with vessel axis. What you're proposing violates maritime aviation law written after 15 years of carrier operations experience. This isn't innovation, Captain. It's amateur nonsense. Campbell had anticipated resistance. He had not anticipated condescension. Commander James continued, "You're asking pilots to land across the ship's natural motion axis. Carriers pitch and roll around their keel. An angled deck means pilots approach at an angle to that motion. They'll be fighting drift constantly. The landing area will be moving underneath them in ways they can't anticipate. You'll increase crashes, not reduce them." Lieutenant Commander Goodhart started to respond, but Louis Boddington, the civilian engineer from Farnborough, raised his hand. "Show me the mathematics," he said. Campbell blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The mathematics," Boddington repeated. "You say pilots will fight drift. Calculate it. An 8-degree angle on a deck moving through 12-degree rolls. What's the differential drift over a 30-second approach?" Silence filled the conference room. Boddington looked at the other engineers. "Anyone?" Nobody spoke. "Then we test it," Boddington said. "Captain Campbell, the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough has painted outline runways for experimental trials. We can paint an angled deck outline on HMS Triumph's flight deck. In 1 week, we run simulated touch-and-go approaches. If the drift problem is real, we'll measure it. If it's theoretical catastrophizing, we'll know that too." Rear Admiral Slattery leaned back in his chair. "Louis, you understand that if you paint an angled deck on Triumph and pilots start crashing, you're ending both your career and Captain Campbell's." "Noted, sir. And if it works?" Boddington smiled. "Then we stop killing pilots who did everything right." The experimental trials began in September 1951. HMS Triumph departed Portsmouth with an angled deck painted in white outline across her axial flight deck, not a structural modification, merely paint demarcating where an angled landing area would exist. For 3 weeks, Royal Navy pilots executed touch-and-go approaches, treating the painted line as if it represented an actual deck edge. The predicted drift problem did not materialize. Pilots adapted within 2 landing attempts. What they discovered instead was psychological freedom. Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the test pilots, later wrote in his official report, "I came in too high, floated past the arresting cables, and for the first time in my career, I wasn't terrified. I just applied full power and climbed away. No barrier waiting to kill me, no aircraft ahead. Just clean air and a second chance. I felt like I'd been given my life back." By October 1951, the painted deck trials proved the concept functionally viable. Now came the substantially more difficult challenge: convincing everyone else, particularly the United States Navy. Triumph was British. The carrier with the highest accident rate, the carrier whose pilots were dying at twice the Royal Navy's statistical average, was American. And the United States Navy did not respond positively to British officers providing advice on carrier landing procedures. September 14, 1951, United States Naval Air Test Center, Patuxent River, Maryland. Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown stands before 40 American test pilots and feels every eye in the room, calculating whether to trust him. Brown serves as the Royal Navy's chief test pilot. He has landed more aircraft types than anyone in aviation history. He holds every British naval aviation record that matters to operational fleet aviation. Right now, none of that matters because he is about to inform the United States Navy that their aircraft carriers are designed incorrectly. Gentlemen, Brown begins, in the past 12 months, how many of you have hit the crash barricade? 7 hands rise, then 12, then 15. How many of you know someone who died hitting the barricade? Every hand rises. Brown opens his briefcase. I'm going to show you something the Royal Navy is testing. It's going to sound insane, but I've made 63 landings on it, and I'm standing here instead of being scraped off a deck. So I'm asking you to hear me out. He pins Campbell's diagram to the wall. An aircraft carrier flight deck angled 8 degrees to port. The room erupts immediately. You want us to land sideways? The LSO can't see the approach angle. What about the island superstructure? You've moved the landing zone toward this ship's superstructure. Brown waits for the noise to subside. Every objection you just shouted, we had every single one. Then we tested it. And here's what we found. When you miss the wires on an angled deck, you don't die. You throttle up and go around. Simple as that. Commander Harold Buell, commanding officer of Fighter Squadron 84, stands. Commander Brown, I've been landing on carriers since 1943. What you re-describing violates every principle we've developed through 8 years of combat operations. You're asking us to throw away proven doctrine for a British theory. I'm asking you to stop dying for a design flaw. The room goes silent. Brown continues, you're landing jets on straight decks because that's what you have. But straight decks were designed for Corsairs and Hellcats that could cut throttle and fall onto the deck. Jets can't do that. So you're forcing 1952 aircraft into 1942 operations, and your people are dying because of it. The angled deck doesn't violate doctrine. It adapts the carrier to match the aircraft. Rear Admiral Apollo Sosek, the senior United States Navy aviator in London, steps forward. I've observed the Triumph tests. Commander Brown is correct. The concept works. I've recommended to the Chief of Naval Operations that we run parallel tests on USS Midway. But Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, Chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, shakes his head. We're already testing solutions. The Davis barrier has a 98.7% success rate. 98.7% of what? Brown interrupts. Of the aircraft that hit it? What about the pilots who never reach the barrier because they see it coming and panic? What about the ones who deliberately ditch in the ocean rather than risk hitting the barricade at full power? Your statistic measures barrier performance. It doesn't measure pilot survival. The room erupts again. Half the pilots are nodding. The other half look ready to remove Brown from the facility. Admiral Sosek raises his voice. Gentlemen, silence. We will test the angled deck on USS Midway. Paint trials, simulated landings. If it works, we modify one carrier for full structural implementation. If it fails, we bury the idea. But we will not continue losing pilots to a design we can test and potentially fix. Are we clear? Admiral Pride stands silent for 10 seconds. Then, Midway trials authorized. But if this British pipe dream causes a single additional casualty, I'm terminating the program and everyone associated with it. Sosek nods. Agreed. The meeting concludes. Brown packs his briefcase, knowing he has bet his career on a painted line. What Brown does not know, within 90 days, the painted line on USS Midway will work so effectively that the United States Navy will convert USS Antietam into the first true angled deck aircraft carrier in the world. The USS Midway trials commenced in October 1951 off the Virginia Capes. Like HMS Triumph, Midway received a painted angled deck outline, no structural modifications, just paint indicating where an angled landing area would exist. United States Navy pilots from Carrier Air Group 6 executed touch-and-go approaches for 6 weeks, treating the painted line as reality. Results matched the British experience. The predicted drift problem did not occur. Pilots adapted immediately. The psychological impact proved even more significant than the technical validation. For the first time in jet carrier aviation, pilots could miss the arresting cables without facing immediate death. They could apply full power, climb away, and attempt another approach. The crash barricade, that steel web that had killed so many pilots, was no longer necessary. By December 1951, the data was conclusive. The angled deck worked. Now the question became, could it be implemented structurally, not just painted on existing straight decks? The Bureau of Ships selected USS Antietam, CV-36, for the first structural angled deck conversion. An Essex-class carrier commissioned in January 1945. Antietam had seen limited combat service in the final months of World War II. She entered the New York Naval Shipyard in January 1952 for what would become the most significant carrier modification since the development of armored flight decks. The conversion required extending an 8-degree sponson from the port side, structurally welded to the carrier's hull. This angled landing area measured 550 feet in length, sufficient for jet aircraft arresting operations. The crash barricade system was removed entirely. Forward deck parking areas were reconfigured to accommodate the new landing zone geometry. The island superstructure required modifications to provide landing signal officers with clear sight lines to the angled deck. The conversion took 11 months. The cost exceeded $8 million, substantial for a modification that essentially added an angled platform to an existing deck. But compared to the cost of losing aircraft and trained pilots, the expenditure was negligible. USS Antietam departed New York Naval Shipyard in December 1952 with the world's first operational angled flight deck. Now came the real test, actual operational landings with the fleet. January 12, 1953, off the coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell, the same officer who had challenged Eric Brown at Patuxent River, pulls his F-9 F-5 Panther into the landing pattern behind USS Antietam. This is his 43rd carrier landing, but his first on an angled deck that is not painted. It is real. An 8-degree sponson extending from the port side, structurally welded to the carrier's hull. Buell does not trust it. He has trained his entire career to hit the wires or face the barricade. That fear has saved his life twice. Now they're telling him to forget it. He drops his landing gear, adjusts trim, calls the ball. Panther, ball, 3.2. Roger, ball, the landing signal officer responds. Buell's approach is perfect until it isn't. A wind gust lifts his aircraft 6 feet. He's high. On a straight deck, this is where the LSO would give him a wave off, and Buell would have to climb away, burn fuel, and try again. But today, the LSO says nothing. Because on an angled deck, being high isn't a catastrophe. It's a correction opportunity. Buell drops his nose slightly, bleeds off the altitude, but now he's long. He's going to miss the wires. On a straight deck, this is where panic sets in, where pilots make desperate corrections that cause crashes. But Buell forces himself to follow the briefing. If you miss, you climb. The deck is clear. Trust it. His wheels slam down. He bounces once. His tailhook skips over the 1 wire, skips over the 2 wire, skips over the 3 wire, skips over the 4 wire. He has missed them all. On a straight deck, the barricade would already be tearing his aircraft apart. But there is no barricade, just open deck and clear air. Buell shoves his throttle to full power. His J-48 engine spools up in 6 seconds. An eternity that feels like a gift. The Panther lifts. He's flying again. 23 seconds later, he's back in the pattern. Second approach. He catches the 3 wire. Perfect landing. Buell climbs out of his cockpit shaking. Not from fear, from relief he didn't know he'd been carrying for years. He will later write in his autobiography, "To an experienced tail hooker, landing a jet airplane on an angled deck was sheer bliss. For the first time in my career, I wasn't afraid of dying during every approach. The psychological weight that lifted off me that day, I didn't realize I'd been carrying it until it was gone. Over the next 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 executed 1,327 landings on Antietam's angled deck. They recorded 8 bolters missed wires requiring go-arounds. On a straight deck, 8 bolters might have meant 5 barrier crashes, 2 aircraft destroyed, and 1 or 2 pilots killed. On the angled deck, 0 crashes, 0 destroyed aircraft, 0 injuries. The data proved undeniable. Before angled deck implementation, 1950 to 1952, United States Navy carrier aviation averaged 647 Class A mishaps per year. Landing accidents accounted for 52% of all losses. After angled deck implementation 1955-1957, Class A mishaps dropped to 321 per year. Landing accidents accounted for 19% of losses. The reduction, 75% fewer landing accidents, 80% fewer barrier-related fatalities. But statistics do not tell the human story. Lieutenant James Davidson does. On March 8, 1953, Davidson brought his damaged Panther back to Antietam. Hydraulic failure, no flaps. Landing speed 20 knots too fast. On a straight deck, he would have ditched in the ocean rather than risk a barrier crash at 145 knots. But Antietam had an angled deck. Davidson made 4 approaches. He missed the wires on every attempt. On the 4th try, he caught the 4-wire doing 142 knots, the fastest successful carrier landing recorded to that point. His aircraft stopped with 11 feet of deck remaining. He wrote to Captain Campbell 6 months later, "Sir, I never met you, but I'm alive to write this letter because you had an idea everyone said was impossible. My daughter was born last month. I got to be there because you refused to accept that good pilots should die for bad design. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you." The British implemented angled decks on HMS Ark Royal in 1955, the first carrier in the world designed from the keel up with an angled deck rather than converted from straight deck configuration. The French converted Clemenceau. The Australians modified HMS Melbourne. By 1957, every major aircraft carrier in the Western world either possessed an angled deck or was being retrofitted with one. The Soviets initially rejected the concept. Soviet naval aviation doctrine emphasized different operational priorities, and Soviet naval commanders viewed the angled deck as a Western innovation that might not suit Soviet requirements. In 1959, after a series of catastrophic landing accidents on their straight deck carrier, Variag, they quietly implemented angled deck modifications. Soviet naval records declassified in 1993 show landing accidents dropped 68% within 6 months of implementation. But the most powerful testimony comes from pilots themselves. Captain John Moore, who flew combat missions over Vietnam from USS Coral Sea, stated, "I made 947 carrier landings between 1954 and 1973. I boltered, missed all the wires 62 times. On a straight deck, that's 62 potential barrier crashes. 62 chances to die or kill the sailors working forward. Instead, I just climbed away and tried again." Every pilot my age has a moment when we think about the friends who died in the 50s hitting barricades. We re-alive because Dennis Campbell drew a line on a piece of paper and refused to shut up about it. By 1975, the angled deck was so universal that young pilots did not even know carriers used to be designed differently. It was not an innovation anymore. It was just how carriers worked. The revolution was complete when it became invisible. Captain Dennis Campbell never gave a press interview about the angled deck. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1954. He attended the ceremonies when HMS Ark Royal launched. The first carrier in the world designed from the keel up with an angled deck. Reporters asked him for comments. He directed them to Louis Boddington and the engineers at Farnborough. When the United States, Navy invited him to the commissioning of USS Forrestal in 1955, the first American supercarrier equipped with angled deck, steam catapults, and optical landing aid. Campbell sent his regrets. He was attending a funeral for a Royal Navy lieutenant killed in a training accident. Not a carrier accident, a helicopter crash, unrelated to anything Campbell had worked on. But the lieutenant had served under him in 1943, and Campbell believed you attended funerals for your people, always. In 1957, the Admiralty awarded him the CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, for services to naval aviation. The citation was 2 sentences. Campbell kept it in a drawer. He retired from the Royal Navy in 1960 and took a position as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, working on the development of vertical takeoff jets. Colleagues remember him as obsessively focused on pilot safety, often irritating designers by adding what they considered unnecessary redundancies to cockpit systems. Dennis would slow down every design review, recalled engineer Anthony Marsh, asking questions like, "What happens if this fails at night in bad weather?" We'd tell him the odds of that failure were 1 in 10,000. He'd say, "What does the pilot do when it happens?" He never cared about odds. He cared about the one pilot who got unlucky. Campbell died on April 6, 2000, at age 92. His obituary in the Times was 4 paragraphs. The Guardian ran 6 paragraphs. Both mentioned the angled deck. Neither captured what it meant. What it meant: every carrier landing since 1953 happens because one pilot refused to accept that colleagues should die preventably. Today, every aircraft carrier in the world, American, British, French, Indian, Chinese, Russian, uses an angled deck. The United States Navy's newest Gerald R. Ford-class carriers feature advanced electromagnetic catapults and arresting gear. But the deck is still angled 8 degrees to port, exactly as Campbell drew it in 1951. Modern carrier pilots make over 15,000 landings per year across the United States Navy's fleet alone. Bolter rate, approximately 8%. That's 1,200 missed wire approaches annually. Without the angled deck, those would be 1,200 potential barrier crashes. How many lives saved? Hundreds per year. Over 70 years, tens of thousands. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black, United States Marine Corps, retired, flew FA-18s off carriers from 1985 to 2007. He hunted down Campbell's family in 2003 and sent them a letter. It read, "I never met your father, but I made 1,417 carrier landings during my career. I boltered missed all the wires 142 times and had to go around. On a straight deck, that's 142 times I might have died. Instead, I just climbed away and tried again. Your father gave me 142 second chances. He gave me a career. He gave me a life. On behalf of every carrier pilot who lived because of him, thank you." Dennis Campbell never responded to that letter. He had been dead 3 years. But his son framed it, because his father never kept his own awards, but he would have kept that. The lesson: some breakthroughs do not come from the experts. They come from the person who refuses to accept that "that's how we've always done it" as an answer. Captain Campbell was not an engineer. He was not a test pilot. He was a bureaucrat who could not ignore dead friends, who had the audacity to draw a simple line on paper and ask, "Why not?" The angled deck saved more lives than any Medal of Honor recipient. It revolutionized naval warfare more than nuclear power or guided missiles. But it did not come from committees or laboratories. It came from a train ride, a notebook, a sketch, and the refusal to shut up when everyone said it was impossible. That is the real story. That is why it matters. Because the next Dennis Campbell might not be an admiral or an engineer, might not have credentials or degrees, might just be someone who sees a problem everyone accepts and refuses to accept it. History does not always belong to the loudest voices or the highest ranks. Sometimes it belongs to the one person who will not let good people die for a bad design. The angled flight deck remains in service on every aircraft carrier in the world. Modern nuclear-powered supercarriers, with their electromagnetic catapult systems and advanced arresting gear, still feature the same 8-degree angle Dennis Campbell sketched on a train in 1951. The innovation has saved thousands of lives over 7 decades of continuous operation. Naval aviation evolved dramatically since Campbell's innovation. Carrier-based aircraft transitioned from subsonic jets like the F-9F, Panther to supersonic fighters like the F-14 Tomcat, then to modern multi-role aircraft like the F/A-18 Super Hornet and F-35C Lightning II. Landing speeds increased. Aircraft weights increased. Approach procedures became more complex. But the angled deck remained constant, proving the fundamental correctness of Campbell's simple geometric solution. Contemporary carrier pilots train on the angled deck from their first simulator sessions. They never experience the terror of landing on a straight deck with a steel barricade waiting ahead. The innovation has become so thoroughly integrated into carrier operations that most modern naval aviators do not know carriers were ever designed differently. The revolution succeeded so completely it became invisible. That represents the ultimate validation of Campbell's work. Not that it was celebrated or rewarded, but that it became the natural way things are done. So obvious in retrospect that people forgot there was ever another way.